I'm Susan Christopherson, and I am a professor in the City and Regional Planning Department at Cornell. And I'm very, very happy to be able to speak to the League of Women Voters, which I have a deep regard for, and the audience that they've invited tonight, and to many of my neighbors and colleagues and friends who are also in the audience. What I'm going to talk about today is a project that looks at the economic consequences of what it has the complex name of high-volume hydraulic fracturing. It's a special kind of vertical natural gas, a special kind of natural gas drilling that uses millions of gallons of water. I may just simply refer to this as natural gas drilling when I'm giving the talk, because I don't want to say high-volume hydraulic fracturing every time I do this. But that's what I'm referring to. This project, what I'm going to present tonight, is the results of a project that has been funded by the Park Foundation in Ithaca and the Heinz Endowments in Pittsburgh. And they were very interested in getting beyond the economic impact studies that had been done to evaluate the economic consequences of natural gas drilling in New York and Pennsylvania. Now, as some of you, very few of you in the audience know about input-output models, one person I know does, the consequences that were determined, the estimates of jobs and taxes and impacts, were based on input-output models. And input-output models are models, and they just present projections. So the foundations really wanted to look at a broader range of consequences, economic consequences. And so last summer, we went about trying to look at this, some of these questions. And I'm going to briefly present some of our results. They're presented in much more detail on my website, which is will be on the screen at the end of this. And we've just posted 3 new policy working papers on that website. So if you're interested in any of these questions, you might go there. But I want to give you an overview. I think that our task really was to tell people or help people think about how to think about economic consequences. How should we think about what's going to happen with natural gas drilling in New York? And I'll just talk specifically about New York tonight. That's a much more complicated question than you would imagine. Now, as most of you do know, the Marcellus shale is one play in a national natural gas boom. And it's the largest, and it's right now considered to have the best economics. It's where drilling is taking place at the fastest rate. The drilling permits in Pennsylvania have gone from 71 in 2007 to almost 2,000 today. So one of the things we have to understand is why there's been this very rapid ramp up in the Marcellus shale. Because if New York State opens up to drilling, we are likely to experience that same very rapid ramp up. And what I want to tell you tonight or present is that has very important implications. The speed, the pace of drilling, how many wells are drilled in what period of time. Now, I just want to say, and this is just obvious, but I think it's important to say when we're talking about economic questions, and as Kay mentioned, the environmental and public health questions related to Marcellus shale gas drilling are absolutely critical. And even though tonight we're going to be talking mostly about economic issues, I don't want to pretend that they aren't. they are absolutely critical, and in some ways, I feel that they take precedence. So when we talk about some of the issues we're talking about tonight, I think we also have to keep in our mind that they are parallel to, but don't supersede our concern for the environment. So when we set about doing this economic development study, and I should say, I teach economic development in the Department of City and Regional Planning. So I have a long-term interest in creating jobs in New York. I've done lots of studies of manufacturing. I'm the manufacturing matters lady. I'm really intent on building manufacturing in upstate New York, which may seem like a fool's errand to some of you, but not me. And so I went into this thinking, okay, I'm going to try to look fairly at whether this is going to create jobs, what kinds of jobs it's going to create, and what the impacts are going to be. And one of the things that I think that we came to over the course of this past year is the conclusion that the environmental studies, the SGIS, the famous Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement, which took me about 3 months to be able to say correctly, it focuses on wells, on individual wells. And in fact, the economic impact reports that had been done in Broome County and in Pennsylvania also looked at investment at the well pad. They were focused on the individual well, and then they would accumulate the impacts across wells. In fact, one of the conclusions we came to is that if you're going to understand the economic impact or the economic effects of natural gas drilling, you really need to look at the cumulative effect of having one number of wells, a number of wells, rather than another number of wells. So, for example, if there are 10 wells drilled in Tompkins County, that will have a very different cumulative effect than if there are 1,000 wells drilled. Particularly if you get 10 wells drilled in 1 year versus 1,000, which is one of the predictions that we have of 1,000 wells being drilled in 1 year. That has cumulative effects because of not just what goes on at the well pad, but because of all the facilities and services associated with natural gas drilling, and because of what has to happen to make that well pad operative, trucks mainly. So the second kind of principle that we went with, or assumption that we went with in looking at economic impact, is to say, to look at what kind of local and regional impacts are likely with a capital-intensive resource extraction industry. And that is to look at what kinds of jobs and investments are going to be produced by this drilling activity. And then finally, and this is something that typically gets neglected, and that is, what are the long-term consequences for economic development in resource extraction industries? What can we expect in the long term? Natural gas drilling is a natural resource extraction activity, and therefore it has a boom-bust cycle. And that is, there will be jobs coming into the region during the boom period. I don't want to pretend that there won't be. There will be economic activity coming into the region. We can see this if you drive over the border into Bradford, Pennsylvania. You can see there's traffic, there's trucks, there's businesses starting, there are jobs being created there. But what is that going to look like in 20 years? That's the question. That's another question we want to answer. And there is some evidence that we can depend on to see what it's going to look like in the long term. So our first question that I want to deal with tonight is how do we get a grip on the questions of cost to communities and long-term implications. Now, we went around and around about this, and what we decided was that the most important thing to think about when you're looking at the economic consequences of natural gas drilling is to look at that boom-bust cycle. As I said, there's going to be a period where wells are going to be drilled continuously over a period of years. Now, and I want to talk about that period of years because that's a very interesting question. And this is going to happen. We could think about this as happening in a region, and so there will be investment coming in. There'll be royalties going to some landowners. There'll be business incomes. There'll be tax revenues and jobs. And then the wells drilled per year will begin to decline, and then the drilling will end, and then there will be a bust. And the drilling jobs will leave the area to go to some other shale play. The businesses that depended on them will have to shut down, and there will be a bust. And so when we look at this, we want to look at the economic impact. In part, we want to look at this cycle, and we want to try to understand, for one thing, what the scale and scope of this and pace of this drilling is going to be. And we also want to understand, try to see what we can say about how long this period is going to last. Now, the Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania made a speech in Pennsylvania a few weeks ago, and he said, in 50 years, Pennsylvania is going to be the Texas of the Northeast. And he somehow doesn't seem to understand this boom-bust cycle. And he also doesn't seem to understand that the industry, the oil and gas industry, is headquartered in Houston. And so when jobs, and this is particularly true of New York, when the industry expands production in the southern tier of New York, what we're going to get are production jobs. We're going to get drilling crews coming from the outside, and we're going to get production jobs. The geologist jobs, the fancy consultants, the lawyers, the management personnel, they're going to stay in Houston. They'll probably increase in number in Houston. But that's because the industry is headquartered there. The oil and gas industry, and this is the only analogy I can give you because this is another industry I study, is like the movie business. So you wouldn't expect that if you made a movie in Binghamton that you were going to turn into Hollywood. And the oil and gas industry, or Houston, is the Hollywood of the oil and gas industry. So it's the headquarters, they're going to stay there, and that's where most of the employment is going to grow. What we're going to get are the production jobs. So this is what we want to pay attention to. So when we think about this, we want to look at what kinds of factors might affect the pace and scale of Marcellus shale drilling. There are a number of things that, and all of these things, or most of these things, are making for good economics in the Marcellus shale play. One is transport costs. We used to have our natural gas piped up from the Barnett Shale in Texas, and the Marcellus shale looks very good because the biggest markets for natural gas are in the east coast of the U.S. So that makes us a prime location. Current tax policy. We all know about the lack of tax policy in Pennsylvania. That is increasing the profit levels of oil and gas companies. If New York doesn't have a tax policy, then we'll look pretty good too to the oil and gas industry. There's also a question of speculative investment, and I am not going to go into that tonight, but many of you, or some of you, may have heard Arthur Berman give a talk in Danby a few weeks ago, and he's a geologist and a investment advisor to the oil and gas industry, to oil and gas industry investors. And he feels that right now the oil and gas industry is in the midst of a speculative bubble around natural gas because the prices are so low, and yet there's a lot of drilling going on. The economics don't seem to match up with the price of natural gas, and so there's a question about why there's so much drilling going on. There's competition among and access to capital by the natural gas companies. Rig availability. There's only so many rigs. This is a very, very expensive, speculative business, and so they're going to allocate rigs to where they can have the best commercial wells, the most profitable wells. Regulatory requirements and capacity. Regulatory requirements can slow down drilling, and as can monitoring. So if you have lax regulation, that's going to create an incentive to drill more quickly. And a decline in other sources. And this is another thing that Arthur Berman has presented, that looking at the Barnett Shale and the Haynesville Shale, both of which preceded us, show what he's called catastrophic declines after about 5 years of production. So one of the things we have to be aware of in looking at pace and scale is that the ramp up may be very fast. There may be lots of wells drilled, speculative wells to keep revenues up, and the downturn may come fairly quickly. So this is what this evidence from other shale plays tell us we might be able to anticipate. Possibly a volatile, short-term, 7 to 10 year, and I'm being generous here, drilling phase, and this is going to move from one locality to another in a region. We have to sort of think about this. There's going to be hot spots, and then the drilling will end in one hot spot. It'll move on to another, and then there will be, though, a broader regional industrial infrastructure, and this is something we have to think about in Tompkins County, because we may not see much drilling, but we will be affected by the regional industrial infrastructure. Okay, as I said, we need to see beyond the well pad. If we look at the local costs of shale gas drilling, the kinds of things, these are cumulative costs. These are affected by how many wells are drilled and in what time period. Accelerated road maintenance, traffic congestion. The trucks, trucks are not popular in Tompkins County. They're not popular with me. I live on Ithaca Road. But this is trucks like you've never seen trucks. This is trucks, in some places, one every minute. So every well pad requires 1,000 truck trips right now. And there's questions about whether there will be recycling of water so that the number of truck trips will be reduced. But that poses its own problems. And I'm not going to talk about those tonight, but it's not necessarily the best solution. Higher public safety costs. One of the things that happens when you get drilling coming into a region is that naturally it's going to be like the gold rush. Lots of people are going to come in. You're going to have a population increase. Housing prices are going to rise. There's going to be an increased demand for educational services. There's going to be an increased demand for public and administrative services. And an increased demand for police. There has been, that's been demonstrated at least by looking at case studies in different shale plays. So essentially, and this is my take-home message here, is that the faster the pace, the higher the cumulative costs. So there are implications here for that. Now, then we ask the question is how these local costs are going to be paid. right now in New York, we really don't have a very good idea of how these costs are going to be paid. We've really benefited from the moratorium. I think the moratorium has been great. People have gotten much more educated. They really know, many more people know what's going on. Some counties are taking steps like doing baseline studies of their roads so that they can determine the impact from these heavy trucks that are going to be moving along the roads. There's been a lot of activity, but there's still a lot that we don't know how our counties would handle it. And we certainly don't have any state tax policy to pay for this kind of damage. There is a property-based severance tax in New York, but and I'm doing some research on this right now, but I can't see how that property-based severance tax is going to be able to pay for all the demands that are going to be made on local communities. Also, the demands on local communities are going to come before they receive tax revenue. So there's going to be a lag period, as far as we know, because of the way that the taxes are set up. Okay, I mentioned this, that there's going to be a regional industrial landscape. Now, those of you who are in contact with people in Watkins Glen and Schuyler County know that there's a plan there for a large gas storage facility in the salt caverns that were owned by U.S. Salt, so there's going to be pipelines linking that, again, trucks, pipelines, all kinds of industrial facilities that are associated with natural gas drilling. So this is the kind of thing you see. Man camps, water evacuation, water extraction sites, compressor plants, which are very noxious, actually, facilities. Staging sites, rail spurs, gas storage sites and facilities, processing facilities for produced water, injection wells, and we really don't have a plan for dealing with produced water right now. So there may have to be facilities constructed for that, and then a lot of trucks. Now I want to. Whoops, what am I doing here? This is something that struck me as quite poignant, and I'm not going to read it, but I think that one of the things that I've noticed in looking at what happened in Pennsylvania is that people were really not prepared for what was going to happen. They really didn't understand that they were going to have one truck a minute going through their town. I mean, they didn't understand the impact on their public safety. They really didn't understand. And this person posted after an article that shocked some people in Bradford County because it showed that the population had actually dropped slightly from 2000 to 2010. That's the resident population. Now they have a huge transient population, and they don't understand how the census works. So they didn't realize that those people are, counted as living in Tulsa, not as living in Bradford County, even though they're using Bradford County services. So there's a lot that people simply don't know what to expect about this, and that's why I think the moratorium has been valuable. Okay, now I just want to finish up here by saying that there is a whole literature in planning and development sociology that talks about why, particularly rural regions, and that, again, we're an urban region here, but places like Schuyler County have particularly frequently have poor development outcomes from this kind of activity. There are a number of reasons that just make sense. They're not rocket science. The volatile revenue, again, these places get revenue during the boom, but they may use it to cut taxes, and so when the bust comes, they've got facilities that they've built to handle more school children and more police, and they don't have the tax base to handle it. It's classic. And then there's crowding out, which really refers to the fact that natural gas drilling or any natural resource extraction industry tends to drive up prices, and also because of it's an industrial activity, it tends to push out or crowd out other activities that depend on a low-cost labor force or that are incompatible with an industrial landscape of the kind I've described. And then, as I said, housing and labor costs rise. And then, again, the reason that they do poorly in many cases is that after that boom period, there are actually very few jobs. We have some evidence from Chautauqua County, and if you look at even the counties in New York that have had vertical gas drilling, it's a small portion of their economy, but they have done worse than the counties nearby. They have a few good jobs, they have higher income inequality, but they have not benefited. I think we could say that clearly. Okay, now this is my last slide here. Okay, this is what I think how we need to think about this from a policy perspective. Slow it down. Slow it down through regulation. Slow it down by controlling permitting. Slow it down as much as possible to minimize those cumulative impacts. We don't want thousands of wells in the southern tier of New York in a short period of years. Impose severance taxes at the state and local level. I just put this one in because I have just reached my limit about the anti-tax attitude. Also, today I read an interesting article about the foreign investors coming into the oil and gas industry, and they expect the natural gas from the Marcellus shale to be liquefied and exported. And so we are producing natural gas for the world, and if we're going to do that, we need to tax it. This is very important. Be transparent. I think Pennsylvania has done a decent job of being transparent about where the drilling is occurring, where incidents are occurring, but I think this is absolutely critical if people are going to have any confidence in the government regulation of this. Plan across governments to minimize negative impacts. Now, as I said, these activities are going to go in these hotspots. These hotspots are not necessarily going to be coterminous with jurisdictional boundaries. We may have a hotspot between Tompkins and Schuyler County, or a hotspot in Schuyler County, and then we're affected by the industrial infrastructure. So there's a need for cross-governmental cooperation, and then be proactive in planning for ways to use this resource. And what I mean is, I think that we should see this as a resource, as a resource that is finite, but it is a resource, and we could potentially use it for district heating, for building some new industries in New York, for doing things where we could actually derive some benefit from having this asset instead of putting it into pipes and shipping it to Philadelphia and New York. So I think that's sort of a very hopeful idea about this, but I think it's an important thing also to think about it as an asset, as something positive. I think the first principle of this, obviously, is that when it's gone, it's gone. So we need to think very seriously about that boom-bust cycle and about what the implications are when we make economic decisions. So I will now quit, and we can turn to the next speaker.